What do you do when your company stops performing the way it used to? I'm not talking about minor issues. I'm talking about it is underperforming. Things aren't working. Maybe key customers are pulling back. Maybe your sales pipeline's thinned out. Costs are rising faster than you can keep up. Decisions are slowing down. Instead of running your business, you feel like you're dragging it somewhere. And it's hard. It's tough. Maybe it's actually sinking and going backwards. If that's where you are, then in this video, I'll show you the exact steps you need to use to help stop the bleeding and turn the entire business around within 90 to 120 days. This will give you clarity, control, and a structure that actually holds. So when your business starts to underperform, and it's happening chronically, it's not just a dip that you're experiencing for, in a normal pattern, but this is an issue and you can't seem to gain traction with where you're going. What you need is a series of steps that will help you change direction. All right, so the very first thing you need to do if you want to turn your business around, if you're struggling with it, and this is maybe a surprising first step, but it is absolutely and 100% what you need to think about and consider, which is, one, you need to commit. What happens most of the time is people ended up where they're at because they're doing the things that made sense to them and felt comfortable to them. And either those things no longer work. That's why your business isn't performing the way it used to or the way it should. Maybe it's because something is not operating internally the way it ought to and it hasn't been fixed or addressed or confronted. Or maybe external circumstances have changed. Whatever it is, you have to be willing to make changes. And that's the difficult thing at the beginning, is that people often want different results without actually having different inputs or different actions. That doesn't work. So the very first thing you need to do is commit to doing what it takes to turn your organization around. Most organizations begin to fail because of decisions that aren't being made, or they're indecisive. Somebody makes a decision and then has 1,000 exceptions for why we shouldn't actually just follow that decision. So you need to make a commitment. That's the very first thing that you need to do. And so the common avoidance topics is dealing with wrong staff, where you have people on your team who no longer are really contributing in the way that they should, or they don't have the ability to provide the kinds of skills that you need for where your organization is at right now. Sometimes companies maintain unprofitable services. They have something that they're passionate about, they love, or maybe it's something they've offered for a long time and it no longer really works or really sells and they don't want to get rid of it. Sometimes they do a really bad job with financial management. I've met a number of companies that perform good. They do great with sales. They do great with providing the product, and then they don't actually bill. And this is something I've run into on several occasions where they're just not collecting their money and the whole organization's struggling as a result of that. A poor client or customer choices. There might be really poor financial controls. That's another topic where often you flip some rocks over in your financial controls or financial management processes, and you discover there's a bunch of bugs that you had always hoped wouldn't be there, and then there they are. So you need to commit to actually dealing with issues and addressing issues and making some decisions that you've been delaying. Perhaps you already know what it is. And so the question I want to ask you now is, what key decision do you know that you've been delaying or putting off that you need to address? Just mark that down for yourself and think about, okay, maybe this thing is something that really is holding us back or dragging us down. The second thing you want to do is stop bleeding. I want to comment actually about this and this topic here. I can't tell you how often I hear this phrase, well, we're a big ship and it takes a long time to turn it around. That is baloney. Naval ships, including aircraft carriers, do not take years or months or days to turn around. They can turn around pretty quick. In fact, an aircraft carrier can turn around so fast that if they don't pull everybody off the deck, put all the airplanes down below, strap everything down, it'll fling things off. If you've ever seen videos of how fast they can turn, it's pretty quick. And so this idea that companies need an indefined a squishy amount of time to actually address things and fix things is really a failure of leadership. And so if you find yourself wanting to say that or saying that, or you hear somebody saying that, that should ding, ding, ding. That's a failure of leadership. Red light should pop up. There's a problem here because it's inaccurate. Turn your ship around. If it's sinking, you don't spend time thinking about it and fussing about it. You fix things right now. So that's what you want to do with stopping bleeding. This is not about long-term strategy. It's not about who you want to be when you grow up as a company. It's about we need to not die right now. So this is very quick triage and addressing issues. There's two major things that you want to look at when you're stopping the bleeding. One is you want to try to get a 13-week forecast for cash flows. This is like a rolling quarter in front of you. If your company is able to produce this kind of forecast, this basically you're looking at the next 3 months essentially in front of you, and you're figuring out what bills do we know that are coming due, when is payroll coming due, how big are those amounts? That's the expenses that you can plot out on your calendar. And then when are any of our receivables coming in? When do we expect any sales to be made, and how long will it take for us to collect on those sales? And is there anything that we can do in that space to begin to correct points where we're just losing money and not making money? Most of the time, companies that are struggling financially don't have this, haven't had this, and have not heard about it. They often like the idea of having that foresight in place, but they haven't taken the time to build the internal disciplines or mechanisms to put this in place and have that. So that's my encouragement to you. So even if you're a small company or you don't have a robust financial management system, you should be able to sit down and plot out over the next 13 weeks, the next quarter, the next 3 months, you should be able to plot out when are the major expenses being made on the calendar, and when do we expect money to come in? And then that starts to give you a sense of your at least near-term trail that you're traveling and any major problems that you can begin to address. So if you know we're going to run out of cash in 2 months, you can begin to figure out how are we going to address that now. That's the first thing. And then you want to begin to try to stop loss at major areas. So stop the bleed at major places. So if there's significant expenses being made that are not necessary to serve your clients or customers well, or to maintain your operations at a minimal level, you want to begin to cut those. And so if there's a significant investment you're looking at, if you're wanting to buy equipment, if you're looking at subscriptions that are nice to have but you don't need, if there's a fancy company or retreat that you're looking at, you want to begin to look at maybe hiring decisions that need to be delayed, whatever the thing is. You want to begin to look at places where money is going out or is planned to go out and begin to stop that. That's the very first step, is we want to stop unnecessary bleeding when it comes to your financial situation or your cash. The second step to that, part of that is you want to be able to bring money in as quickly as you can. And so part of that is looking at your ARs. This is where we discover this a lot with your ARs, your accounts receivables. And so I've found with companies that have over 10% of their annual revenues out in aged receivables, or not even aged. One company I was working with was telling me they were doing fine for a long period of time, and then it turned out that they were really, really cash tight and stressed. And I asked why, because they were supposedly doing so well, and it turns out that even though they had been winning the work, performing the work, they hadn't been billing. So these aren't even in receivables yet, they're invoices. They hadn't even been invoiced. It was all work that was done that hadn't been sent out yet. And so they were running into a massive cash flow problem simply because they weren't going out and collecting the money. So that's the other part, is collect. We'll just call it the low-hanging fruit. But you want to go out and get the money that's easiest for you to get right now. And so this includes talking to people that are maybe having a hard time paying and working out payment plans with them. But you want to begin getting that to move. That may seem too simple, like stop spending money you don't need to spend and go get the money that's already owed to you. But I can't tell you how often those two issues are all that's needed to begin to stop the bleeding and give you the traction that you need to begin to turn around. All right. The third thing that you want to begin to do is diagnose what changed, or diagnose the problem. You want to begin to figure out what is it in the either internally or externally that shifted, or both, that actually led to the decline or led to the stagnation of the company. And so you can use something like a SWOT analysis for this. There's different tools that you can look at. But what I would do, the big thing that you want to think about around this is not jumping to conclusions, because oftentimes there's stories that emerge that we blame everything on that actually aren't as true as we might think. And so there might be a new competitor in our space, and our story is that competitor is the one that's taking all of our business from us. That may or may not be as true as we might think. Or there might be an employee that we have that frustrates us in some way, and so we tend to blame everything on that employee. That may or may not be true. And so you want to make sure that you have an accurate diagnosis of your problem. And some of that is asking yourself a few questions. The first one is, what's changed? From when we were doing well to when things started going off, what were the major changes that took place? And what can we learn from those? The second thing you want to ask yourself is, how permanent are those changes? Is this just a slump that you're going through and you can foresee that things are going to get better? In other words, is this more of a cash flow management problem versus an actual trajectory issue for the company? Sometimes cash flow issues can look like trajectory issues, and that's what we're talking about here sometimes is cash flow issues. It can look like trajectory, but you can turn those around oftentimes without a lot of difficulty if you're willing to make some decisions that might feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, but they're overall healthy for the company. The other thing you want to ask yourself, is this a leadership issue? Is there something that for myself as a leader or the leadership team that we've been avoiding or that we've been delaying on? Oftentimes that's the issue. Or are there issues of accountability? I cannot tell you how frequent it's been. In fact, I would say it's close to 95% of the time when I work with companies and we're working on turnaround dynamics, accountability and lack of clarity are the issues. This is why you hear me talk about those things so much in my videos. Clarity in particular is oftentimes the team doesn't have a clear sense of, or a unified and clear sense of, this is what we're trying to accomplish. These are our priorities. And then everybody's held accountable to the steps that they need to take or the standards they need to hold to achieve those priorities. And when that begins to happen, things begin to snap together most of the time. Another issue could be environmental. Maybe, for example, right now with artificial intelligence or AI, we're starting to see some pretty significant shifts in a few industries and in a few markets. And so that may be impacting you in some way, or maybe there's some regulatory change, etc. So you want to think about, are there environmental shifts that we just haven't positioned for or responded to? So what you want to try to do is begin to think through what changed, and then what does that indicate to us strategically for how we should begin to move forward? Does that mean that this product that we used to offer no longer sells the way it used to, and so we can no longer count on it? Or maybe we've got a customer that we became accustomed to relying on, and now when we look at it, they've actually not been buying from us as much, and we need to figure out why and either address that issue with them, or we need to begin to expand our customer base out. You get those kinds of dynamics going on, or maybe there's a staffing problem that hasn't been addressed for too long. I've seen that happen as well, particularly with fast growth companies, is you have employees who are not performing. Either they don't have the interest or the capacity to keep up, or they're actually working in some way that's unfortunately is destructive or toxic to the organization, and it hasn't been addressed because they've been there for a long time and it's uncomfortable. And so addressing those kinds of issues, I've seen at times, and don't jump to conclusions around this, but there are times that I've seen where dealing with one problem employee has sometimes changed the entire trajectory of the organization, particularly if that employee is in a senior leadership role. So it's something to at least ask questions about. The fourth thing you want to begin to look at is to look at structural problems. Or risks. Is there something about your internal setup that needs to be addressed? And this is after you stop the bleeding and you start to have an idea of what's going on with the problem and you're working on changing it. You want to ask yourself, is there anything structurally, internally that can or should be improved? Oftentimes there's over concentration with one customer. You get a really good relationship with some customers, and then it turns out that they actually are a major source of your revenues, and that can feel very comfortable. But that scenario or situation nearly always changes in some amount of years. And if you're not used to that, many companies get caught flat-footed, and they often don't recognize it or see it coming. My rule of thumb is that no single company should make up more than 15% of your total revenues of your organization. And so you want to be careful that if you have a company and it makes up 20%, if it makes up 50%, I've got clients where they've had 100% of their revenues come from a single company. And in one particular case, I warned them, like, this is very, very dangerous. All they have to do is just change their mind. And they just didn't believe that was going to be possible. And that client changed their mind, and the company went through a pretty hard time for a little while. They eventually figured it out, but they really suffered for a period of time because they lost their one client. And it's a dangerous scenario to put yourself in. So looking at customer concentration, oftentimes poor staff planning. Right now, in particular, in most industries, it's difficult to hire the people that you need. Even though the news talks about all the layoffs that's going on within some sectors, most industries are struggling to hire, and they're not bringing in the leadership or the high-level technical skills that they need to really make the organization run well. And they're not backfilling the older generation that's retiring out and holds a lot of institutional knowledge about how things work, and that's often being lost. And so that's not going to be replaced with AI or anything else, to my knowledge. And so you want to be careful about looking at some of those things. So where is a place in your company? A question to ask yourself here is, where have we exposed ourselves to risk within our organizational structure, and maybe without realizing it? And what do we need to do about that? So when your systems or your results start to break down, it's rarely due to just one thing. And that's what makes it dangerous and sometimes a little complicated to understand. I created my website, christianmuntean.com, for business owners and leaders who need clarity when things are complex. That's where I share proven perspectives and principles that will help you quickly refocus your team, fix your structure, and build lasting momentum. You can find a link to my website in the video description below. The next question that you want to begin to do is you want to improve decision velocity. A friend of mine, Craig Ballantyne, often uses this statement called success loves speed. And there's a tendency to, fall into analysis paralysis, or to overthink things or overcomplicate things. You want to move fast. Most leadership decisions, there's a few that you can't correct or fix afterwards, but most leadership decisions you can go back and edit and improve on and fix. And so it is often better to make a fast, pretty good decision than to sit and wait and wait and wait and deliberate about a perfect decision, especially if you're trying to turn around and the question that you have is not about a growth strategy, but a survival strategy. And so you want to think through, what is it about our leadership? And if you're the leader watching this, you want to think, what is it about my tendencies that causes decisions to slow down and to not actually be executed or followed up on? Oftentimes there's a discomfort with a particular decision because we're afraid it's going to generate conflict, or we're afraid that somebody might think something negative about us or our company if we act on it. Whatever it is for you, you want to think about that, identify it, and figure out how you're going to address it so that you can start moving at a pace that matches the actual problem that you're dealing with. The sixth thing that you need to look at is realigning the team. So you want to look at, are there mismatches, or are there people, as in the old Jim Collins language, are there some of the wrong people on the bus? Are there people on our team that don't belong here? Or are there people that are on the wrong seats? And you want to begin to figure out, who does our team need to be for us to be successful? And in what seats does everybody need to be in? Because oftentimes people have outgrown the seat that they're in, or the seat outgrew them. And you want to begin to make sure that those matches are accurate for where you're actually at. Additionally, you have companies that sometimes shift because you have key players that were major performers, and they're still good people, they're still trying to do a good job, but maybe there's been a major life shift, like a health issue or a family issue, and their focus, their concentration, their energy levels, their drive are no longer there. And it isn't really, I wouldn't categorize recognize it as a failure on their part, but you need to recognize that the performance or the output you used to get from them, you're no longer getting. And if they're not able to match that, you have to be honest about, okay, we need to make changes. This might not mean letting them go, but it might mean scaling down your expectations around them and then finding someone else who can actually provide that energy and drive that's needed. And so you want to look at what operational mismatch exists that's creating friction or pulling the company down. Another part of realignment that often happens is that, going back to that staff planning issue, is that people find that there's maybe too inexperienced people in complicated roles. Or you have people that were promoted into leadership decisions that are still struggling with being too in the weeds with things and not delegating effectively or holding other people accountable or not being clear regarding their expectations. And so you just want to look at those scenarios and address them based off of objective reality. Can this person perform well in this role? And if not, what changes do we need to make? If you make these changes, these 6 particular changes, you should experience a turnaround within about 90 days to 120 days. If you commit to action, you stop the bleeding, all of this should just not take very long at all to at least identify and to make most of the major changes. Sit down with your key thinkers on your team and diagnose the problem. Fix some of the structural issues that lead to ongoing problems. Your decision velocity, start making decisions, don't sit on things, and realign your team. Most of this can be structured and set out and set in place within the first 30 to 45 days, depending on how complicated it is to bring your team together and think about it. Some of this really could happen within the first few days or a week or two of noticing that there's acknowledging and accepting that there's a long-term problem with your trajectory. Then the remainder of the time is acting out the decisions that were made in the processes, in the thinking processes that are defined here. Those are the steps that you need that will help you turn your company around. I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to make that commitment to action, and you'll see the results that you're looking for. All right, so whether your business is bleeding cash or just coasting without clear direction, now you've got a strategic path forward. But I want to point out a similar situation that sometimes requires a similar response, but might look different. This is leadership transition. After a leadership change, performance often dips, and without the right moves, it can spiral. That's why I created a video that walks you through how to turn things around fast, especially when performance dips after there's a leadership transition in a succession scenario. So this is what new leaders need to do differently and how to rebuild vision and accountability quickly. So you can watch that video next right here.